Hello and welcome to the first of our Lunchtime Looks series for 2024. Today we are pleased to have an alum of the art history program here at West Virginia University. This is Zach Hunley, who is currently the Visitor Services Coordinator at the Miller Institute for Contemporary Art at Carnegie Mellon University. But they are originally from the Mountain State and earned that MA in art history in May 2023 with a particular interest in combining art historical methodologies with critical feminist epistemic theory and understandings of queer aesthetics. All of that. And today they are going to help kick off our programming for 2024 by telling us a little bit about this print by Ellsworth Kelly, who was the subject of some of their thesis research, as well as the larger portfolio of which it is a part. So, without further ado, I give you Zach Hunley.
Well, thank you, Dr. Harris, for the introduction. It's awesome to see so many familiar faces here, and I'm delighted to be here. So, start with some acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the Art Museum of WVU for extending me this opportunity with direct acknowledgements not only to Dr. Harris and curator Bob Bridges, but the entire staff and all the student workers here as well. As Dr. Harris noted, I'm an alumni of WVU, and I completed my undergrad studies here in 2021 in political science and multidisciplinary studies, and then went on to receive my master's in art history this past spring. As someone born and raised in southern West Virginia, I can certainly say that the Art Museum of WVU is a vital necessity for the visual artistic culture, not only here at WVU and at Morgantown, but for the entirety of West Virginia. So thank you again to the Art Museum of WVU. I'm delighted and honored to be here to discuss these prints and specifically focus on an artist who has meant so much to me in my research as an art historian, Ellsworth Kelly. So before we dive into the art itself, I would like to start with a kind of a general overview of what I'll be detailing here today. After speaking with Bob about the work back here in the Dean Print Gallery, I'd like to start with an overview of this landmark mid-century print portfolio on display here for us in its entirety. Next, I'd like to direct focus to the prints I have flanking me by Andy Warhol and Ellsworth Kelly. Developing this talk allowed me to reconsider the goals I set for my master's thesis on Kelly, and so I'd like to offer you all a reiterative form of my research reworked with the more direct context of the exhibitions on here at the museum for the semester. So I want everyone's primary focus to be on the prints here in the gallery, but some additional visuals are going to be provided by Dr. Harris, and they'll be touched on throughout my talk. So let's begin with our portfolio of prints titled For Meyer Shapiro. We have 12 prints in total belonging to this series, each distinctive in their style and formal aesthetics, and all by different artists. So I'll start with this kind of keystone piece over here. We have Alexander Lieberman's gestural and expressive Untitled. On the wall behind you all, we have Klaus Oldenburg's Loose and Literal Three Hats. In the middle back there, we have Frank Stella's array of juxtaposed diagonals in red and blue with Tetuan 3. To the right of that piece is Saul Steinberg's observationally technical and sketch-like Untitled on the wall behind you all to the right, to my right. Welcome, guys. We have Roy Lichtenstein's comic book-like still life, also Untitled. To the right here, we have Stanley William Hayter's kinetic and colorful backwash, Jasper Johns' Hallmark Target on the wall behind me, beginning with Andre Masson's linear and mythic Adrian's Clue, Ellsworth Kelly's green curve with radius of 20 feet. Behind me is Robert Rauschenberg's sparse collage titled No Name Elephant, Andy Warhol's indiscernible sandwiching of pop imagery into a neatly layered black rectangle with Untitled 12. And then finally, we have Robert Motherwell's reductive representation of a Jewish prayer shawl with Talit. So those of you who have ever taken or have had to write a paper for an art history course may recognize the way I've outlined some of these works as a form of formal analysis. This process is something deeply embedded in the art historical discipline. We observe and describe the formal elements, line, form, color, medium, and so on, in order to support and deduce our interpretation of the work's meaning. So as we move on to examine the Warhol and Kelly more closely, I wanted to highlight the subjectivity present in one of our history's most seemingly objective tools. You may stand before these prints and feel, see, and interpret them in a way wholly different than you or your friend, and I think that's one of the things that makes art such a powerful and important cultural tool. So this brings us to Meyer Shapiro himself. He was an art historian and a critic who lived from 1904 to 1996. Shapiro's family immigrated from Lithuania to New York in 1907, and he grew up in Brooklyn's predominantly Jewish neighborhood of Brownsville. Shapiro was a multidisciplinarian with backgrounds in philosophy, art history, and mathematics. He also practiced art throughout his life. He graduated from Columbia University and joined their art history faculty as an assistant professor in 1936. Shapiro was considered a friend to many artists such as Robert Motherwell, Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, and Mark Rothko. While working in New York City during the 40s and 50s, he embedded himself in the Greenwich Village art scene that would go on to be known as the New York School, a band of abstract expressionist artists who would solidify the city as being the new art capital of the Western world. Shapiro's impact on art history is difficult to overstate, and as a member of MoMA's acquisitions committee, Shapiro played a major role in getting work by artists like de Kooning and Pollock into the institution where they are now heralded as landmarks in American art. In terms of their portfolio, we see here the collection of artists presented in this edition series of 100 were done essentially as a fundraiser. The profits from the initial sale of each portfolio were allocated to the endowment of an art history professorship at Columbia in honor of Shapiro, who retired from teaching at the university in 1973. In terms of what I'd like to discuss now regarding Kelly and Warhol, I'd like to share a quote from Meyer Shapiro on artistic style. Quote, "Style is, above all, a system of forms with a quality and meaningful expression through which the personality of the artist and the overall outlook of the group are visible. It is also a vehicle of expression within the group, communicating and fixing certain values of religious, social, and moral life through the emotional suggestiveness of forms," end quote. My initial plan for this talk was to largely leave Meyer Shapiro out of the conversation. However, after finding the quote, I had to reconsider. There's just so much to investigate in Shapiro's words, and I'd like to kind of do so in the context of these two prints. So what systems of forms do we find at play? How are the personalities of the artists visible or not? What about the overall outlook of the sociopolitical group these artists found themselves working in? And perhaps most importantly, what cultural values are affixed and suggested by the forms we see in these prints? So this finally brings our conversation to Ellsworth Kelly, who's a truly prolific artist who lived from 1923 to 2015. With a career spanning 6 decades, Kelly's practice encompassed everything from printmaking, painting, drawing, and sculpture to photography, collage, architecture, and beyond. He is known primarily for his hard-edge abstraction technique, positing the formal elements of form, line, and color as inseparable elements to be pictorialized for their own sake. This is what drew me to Kelly. From the first time I laid eyes on his work back in high school, I became fascinated by his commitment to style, a style that is often considered to be monolithic in nature. As I gave art history more serious focus, I noticed a similar homogeneity in how Kelly had been regarded within the discipline. Canonized views of Kelly's work presented even more problems and resonance for me as a queer individual when I learned he too was a gay man. Why wasn't this topic up for consideration in discussing how Kelly grew to develop his signature color field style? And more concerning to me, why did it feel like his identity couldn't be considered alongside his art? Who made that rule? These are the questions I tried to answer and grapple with. Kelly's personal history within the canon as it pertains to his art has been sanitized by historians, critics, and even the artist himself so as to neatly account for his style. Though I would argue such views are as reductive as the forms Kelly depicted. To offer an overview of this neatly direct, yet conceptually problematic account of Kelly's personal history, let's more closely examine Green Curve with radius of 20 feet. Kelly developed his keen observational eye as a child by closely observing birds and insects, a practice he would extend to plants and other natural elements present in his surroundings. He maintained a practice of sketching plants throughout his career as a way of exercising the connection between what he observed optically and how he would depict form in the studio. So this expertly articulated curve we see in this print is the product of Kelly's decades of practice. He studied art in academic settings and even spent a brief period at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where he lived from 1948 to 1954. Ultimately, Kelly developed his style on his own, The freedom he experienced in France granted him the freedom from the artistic climate that had been developing in the United States, especially New York, though Kelly would make his return to the city in 1954. While in France, Kelly developed a strong affinity for Romanesque and Byzantine art of the Middle Ages, specifically medieval illuminated manuscripts and basilica architecture. He developed an equally strong affinity for the modernist artistic concepts of chance, something more closely characterized as a method of removing the artist's conscious decision-making from the act of artistic creation. One aspect of Kelly's approach to abstraction that I have found to be fruitful for my own analytical understanding of the artist is the notion of subject veiling. Kelly would reveal the source of his abstraction, as with Green Curve with radius of 20 feet, but he would more often choose not to divulge such information, opting instead for untitled or a version thereof. Historians most directly connect this aspect of Kelly's practice to his time in active enlistment in the US Army during the Second World War, where he worked as a member of the Ghost Army from 1943 to 1945. Stationed in France, England, and Germany, the primary task of Kelly and his comrades in this top secret division was to develop camouflaging techniques and inflatable decoys of armored vehicles to misdirect enemy combatants. Camouflage and decoys are objects which literally serve to disguise their subjects, and Kelly's enlistment no doubt impacted his commitment to veiling the subjects he chose to depict, such as a green curve whose angle represents a slice taken from a monumental circle with a presumed height of 40 feet. So when I read art historical texts detailing Kelly's time in World War II and the following years he spent in Paris, I became pretty dissatisfied with what I hold to be foundational and equally important consideration for why Kelly embraced subject veiling so closely, his gay identity. Kelly lived and worked during a time in history where living as an openly gay individual, much less one in active military service, was out of the question. It was criminalized. How could such context be left out of the canon? The art of the 60s and 70s that we see here at the museum can be seen as a response to the turbulent era of the 1940s and 50s, specifically with regard to the tumult of the Second World War and the socioeconomic ripple felt thereafter. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequent Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked an end to the Jim Crow era. The advent of computer technologies during this time marked a new age of mass media and material consumption never before experienced by humankind, something whose impact is clearly evident in the artists in this portfolio, such as Lichtenstein and Warhol. But it's also equally important to note which groups held enough privilege during this time to fully embrace these new freedoms and which did not. Kelly was not alone in Paris during the 40s and 50s. Many artists during this time were able to take advantage of governmental aid through the GI Bill to live and develop as artists in a place that was geographically and sociopolitically far from the US. This not only allowed Kelly to develop his style wholly independent of the abstract expressionist artist in New York, but the freedom to experience at least some degree of openness as a gay man. It's easy to offer a romantic look at Kelly's personal history as if he existed in a historical vacuum, as if his service to the US and the Ghost Army and his motivations for presiding in Paris after had nothing to do with anything beyond his desire to develop as an artist. Ignoring the realities queer individuals faced during the era of McCarthyism, the Second Red Scare, and the Lavender Scare of the late 40s to mid 50s does very little to enrich our understanding of Kelly's work today. I mean, what good would it be for me to sit here and talk to you all about the formal properties of the screen art for 30 minutes? I love the piece, but I also think you all get it. When Kelly arrived back in the US, settling in New York in 1954, he was not well received. His reductive, brightly colorful style was not yet in vogue within an artistic scene enthralled by the gestural, ego-based art of the Abex artists like Rothko and Pollock, which strove to elicit feelings from the viewers related to their subconsciousness and the mythic sublime. In a 1992 interview, Kelly described his artistic impulse as being rooted in a desire to, quote, find something away from personal art. I wanted something outside of myself, to get away from my personality, end quote. This is something clearly evident in the piece we see here in the gallery. Kelly was a master at removing any inclination of the human hand or of the human expressivity in his work. I'd like to now detail a portion of Kelly's history, personal history, that came to light only in 2002 during an interview with a fellow artist and close friend who lived and worked alongside Kelly in Paris. After applying for a position as a night watchman through the US's Marshall Plan program in Paris, Kelly's friend Ralph Coburn was questioned on the artist's behalf by the FBI. He said, quote, Apparently, the investigators were particularly concerned about Kelly's sexuality, end quote. And in another interview conducted later that year, he provided more context. Quote, I was terrified. The FBI's investigation was very unsettling. There was always the possibility of slipping up and saying something wrong, and I didn't want to say anything incriminating that could be used against Ellsworth or myself. In hindsight, the consequences of revealing the wrong information could have been disastrous for us both, end quote. And I'll note that these quotes came from, and the conceptual idea of subject veiling also come from the scholar Stuart Y. Steck, whose 2008 doctoral dissertation titled Veiling the Subject, Ellsworth Kelly and the Discourses of Modernism greatly informed my research on Kelly. He's basically the only source I was able to uncover that gave a direct and serious focus to Kelly's personal history outside of the canon, and especially his identity. Given the disciplinary differences between Steck's work and my own, Steck was a doctorate in philosophy, I wanted to take a whack at offering a recanonization of Kelly firmly rooted in art history. So this process, however, led me to kind of question the role of the art historian. Is it to simply continue promulgating what we have held to be true, or is there room and space for reevaluation? Of course there is. What about counter-histories? Can what is known exist in tandem with what has been ignored? And as someone who spent the majority of their life in the closet, veiling my own sense of self from the socio-political realities I observed and felt here in Appalachia, I sympathize deeply with Kelly. As an art historian informed by feminist and queer scholarship, working in this specific moment in history, I wanted to be an active participant in evaluating the role we play in making and understanding culture, and with making and remaking culture as history itself. So let's now consider the Warhol print here in the gallery, Untitled 12, and the broader relationship between the artist and Kelly regarding the ways in which their shared positionalities as queer men surface in their artistic approaches. So Warhol is perhaps one of the most well-known queer artists of the 20th century. His prints featuring drag queens were on display in the True Colors Picturing Identity exhibition here at the museum back in 2022. And his work centering queer identities is remembered for bringing humanity, empathy, and bold expressivity to the stigmatized and overlooked by the heteronormative mainstream. Untitled 12 is decidedly the opposite of that approach. While appearing as a solidly black rectangle from a distance, the textural variations in the surface of the print play with light as you get closer and move around the image, and a layered stack of some of Warhol's most iconic images, the Campbell's soup can, a cow, an electric chair, his flowers, Brillo boxes, and a Kellogg's cornflake box reveal themselves. Just as Kelly has veiled from us the entirety of his green circle, Warhol has veiled from us the imagery of his distinct body of work. This is not the first time Warhol initiated the act of subject veiling. He used literal camouflage in several series of self-portraits and all-over camouflaged patterned prints. But in thinking about how Kelly chose to veil a subjecthood from his work, Warhol was not much different. He was known for his celebrity persona, which offered the public little in the way of what compromised his true sense of self. For Bob Colasello, a close friend and associate of Warhol, the artist's affinity for camouflage was, quote, a compulsion, a strategy, and a camp. He camouflaged who he was, where he came from, what he thought, but most of all, he camouflaged his feeling, end quote. Kelly produced a conceptually similar series of prints to those by Warhol in the 1990s, and they're some of the only works produced which include visual and pictorial representations of him and his life partner, Jack Shear. These prints have largely been disregarded in Kelly's scholarship. However, in this context, I see significant resonance with Warhol. I argue that both artists bore the heteronormative weight of late modernism's emphasis on formalism, and that veiling their subjectivity by removing their true senses of selfhood from their art was not only a product of individual choice, but a self-preservation strategy, with the goal being to shield themselves from the violently heteronormative sociopolitical landscape they lived and worked in. With the decisions of what was and was not good or important art falling into the hands of individuals like Meyer Shapiro during this time, someone who I noted was very close to the abstract expressionist artists and also had a heightened institutional authority at the Museum of Modern Art, it's no wonder why queer artists such as Kelly and Warhol embraced abstraction. So I hope my talk has provided you all with some context to the exhibitions on for the semester, and that my art historical methodologies have demonstrated the importance and power of interrogating biases within the canon. I also hope that I've made clear the impact our own positionalities play in what and how we see our work and duty within the discipline of choice, with our discipline of choice. Just as artists of this time embrace fluidity, abstraction, new mediums, and viewer participation, I hope we can use this creative energy to remember the importance and power present in the simple act of looking wherever the wind takes you. Thank you all very much.
So thank you very much, Zach. And it's a joy to have you back here. It's a joy as a professor to now serve you as your magician's assistant with all of these images after you've graduated and brought together all of these really wonderful analyses of the work in this exhibition. So now if we have any questions, we'll pass the microphone around so that our recording at home can pick up the sound. Anyone have a question for Zach? Anything? There's a lot there. Of course, Dr. Snyder always has a question.
Hi, Zach.
Hi, Dr. Snyder.
It's a real simple question. The source of the name, the curve, is if I were to stretch that out, it'd be a curve?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can kind of see, and it's intentionally, designed in a way that it kind of activates your eyes to kind of question what you're seeing in a way. So there is a real slight curvature to the green of the print on the far right side here. Right. So yeah, if you were to basically connect a bunch of those, you'd have a circle with a height of like 40 feet, I believe. So it'd be yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
How has Andy Warhol impacted your life as being a part of Carnegie's, Mellon University's art series? Like, how has that impacted you as an artist itself?
Yeah, well, I think just kind of generally, Warhol is one of the first artists I think most people kind of come in contact with when it comes to like modern and contemporary art. And so for me, it was like, I guess seeing like an everyday image refracted through like an artistic lens in a way, I was like, whoa, like anything can kind of be possible in art. So I'd say that's what it is, yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions? Yes, Dr. Herron.
Thank you for your talk.
Yeah.
When I see Warhol's Black Square, I can't help but think of Malevich's Black Square.
Totally.
So what's is there a formal relationship? Was this a play on Malevich, or is this just sort of coincidental?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't able to uncover a whole lot about pretty much any of these prints specifically, but I thought the same thing, like the Black Square is used in art history, and Malevich's approach is spiritual, very spiritual, and so I think with Warhol, I don't want to speak for Warhol, and I don't know what his thoughts were, but I think he's probably kind of poking fun at it a little bit, yeah. So in the context of like more gestural and abstract art here, and knowing Meyer Shapiro was kind of so close to those abstract artists, Meyer Shapiro didn't have a say in what was included in the portfolio, so I would like to think it's Warhol kind of poking fun a little bit, yeah.
So I just showed one of the Malevich Black Square as for the Malevich Black Square for reference for those of you all, and probably without a close look, it probably looks identical there. And I would encourage you all, after we get up, to get up and take a close, but not too close, look at this print and try and discern some of these layers that were photographed in this handout. Yes, Professor Light.
So, Zach, I don't know if you know this, but West Virginia Wesleyan also received one of these portfolio collections.
Oh, cool.
And so, do you know anything about the history of how it came to be at West Virginia University?
I believe Bob told me something along the lines of that the person who gifted it to the museum basically wanted it to be accessible to people in the region, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. Bob might be able to share more detail, yeah. Yes.
No, I will not tell them about the other portfolio. The other portfolios were West Virginia Wesleyan and then Oberlin.
Okay.
The same donor donated to our university. And this would have been roughly around the time that it was published. And it was encouraged, I've heard, to do this, to buy a portfolio for yourself if you have the means, than to try to distribute portfolios to regional art centers that do not have access to the city, New York, and the art. capital.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that this portfolio is also in the collections of like MoMA and the Met, so it's awesome that we have the whole series here in our museum.
Hi, Zach. It's great to see you again, and I just applaud your presentation today. You've given us so much content to think about and challenging content, but managed to make it pretty accessible, so well
Thank
done. My first question, I have two, is I know you only finished your thesis recently, but are you strategizing about how to get your new interpretation of Kelly out there?
Yeah, so I mean, this talk was great to kind of distill down and, after thinking about it for a few months. But there is, Kelly had his centennial birthday, or what would have been his centennial birthday last year. So there's a huge retrospective kind of exhibit at Glenstone in Potomac, Maryland. I'm hoping to make my way down there soon and see it. From what I've heard, it's awesome. Just the work, some of it's not been on display ever, so that's pretty awesome, yeah. So hoping to see that soon.
And one last question about Kelly. So, you certainly have opened my eyes to how his work is always prompted by something directly observed in the world. Did he accept the label he was given of being a non-objective artist? Did he consider himself to be an abstractionist?
I'm not 100% certain, but I do believe that the way he talked about his art and getting himself out of it, and it wanting to be more of like an optical kind of experience, I would say so, yeah. I think he embraced it probably, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'd like to give a big thank you to Zach again.
Thank you all for coming, yeah. Thanks.
Looking ahead, we have a couple programs coming up. So the next iteration of this Lunchtime Looks series will be on Friday, March 1st at noon. And our speaker then is Betsy Osborne, who is faculty. She has a dual appointment in the Department of History and the College of Applied Human Science, and she has a focus on social studies education. So all of that kind of cultural tumult that Zach referenced from an art historical lens, she's going to talk about how that filters through her lens as a scholar of education and pedagogy, and why that time period continues to resonate for us culturally. So that'll be on Friday, March 1st. I'd also like to announce the College of Creative Arts just did a press release that this fall we were awarded an Access for All grant from the Art Bridges Foundation that is allowing us to do some new and innovative programming. We kicked that off last week with a story hour for preschoolers. And we are going to continue on Friday, February 23rd. We are going to have our first bilingual event here at the Art Museum of WVU, in which we're going to have a tour of both of these exhibitions in both English and Spanish at 5:30 p.m. We're going to have some food and refreshments and self-guided activities at 6:30 p.m. And students, native Spanish speakers, non-Spanish speakers, and all community members, so even if you're not affiliated with the university, you're welcome to come. And be on the lookout for more information and posts about these programs that are going to be supported by the Art Bridges Foundation. We're going to get to do some really fun stuff. So we hope to see you on February 23rd, March 1st, and we thank you for coming here today. And thank you again, Zach.
Thank you all.